But we begin this hour with Donald Trump's continued retribution tour and his use of the Department of Justice to see it through. Axios is reporting that on Friday, Attorney General Pam Bondi fired more than 20 DOJ employees who worked on cases involving January 6th and Trump's classified documents case. Earlier this week, the DOJ confirmed it opened criminal investigations into two of Trump's repeated targets, former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey. According to the New York Times, the FBI is using polygraphs to test officials' loyalties, with many having been asked whether they have said anything negative about FBI Director Kash Patel. And Trump's retribution tour is even going after private citizens, with Trump yesterday threatening to, quote, take away actor and comedian Rosie O'Donnell's citizenship, calling her a, quote, threat to humanity. She is, of course, born here in America. Joining us now, two people who know what it's like to be targeted by Donald Trump. Miles Taylor, former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security during the first Trump administration, and Michael Feinberg, former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI. Feinberg resigned earlier this year after he said he was targeted because of his friendship with former FBI agent and Trump critic Peter Strzok. All right, Mike, I want to start with you because you wrote on Thursday, July 3rd about your leaving. Also, FBI agents aren't used to being in public, so we appreciate you doing that.
Glad to be here.
You wrote on Lawfare, goodbye to all that. And something you said, and I'm sorry to the control room because I didn't, we do have this. Under Patel and Bongino, subject matter expertise and operational competence are readily sacrificed for ideological purity and the ceaseless politicization of the workforce. That feels like something that was really hard to say as someone who loves the department, and also, more importantly, something scary for the American people to hear.
It very much was, and you'll note that my piece came out roughly a month after I actually resigned, and I really struggled with whether to come forward with my story. The reason I ultimately did was I kept getting asked by people still on board, from the lowest probationary agents to very high-ranking senior executives, to make the story known so that not only the American public would understand exactly what's going on at the FBI, but also so the agents and analysts and professional staffs themselves could sort of steel themselves in case this ever happened to them. Because unfortunately, there's nobody really safe in the workforce anymore.
Michael, you served for 15 years and you have a pension on the line. For the risk of speaking out, there are stakes for you. It's not nothing to go and do this. Why was this moment just so particularly troubling in terms of how the agency changed under new leadership?
Well, so I do want to clarify one thing. I had a pension on the line. That has been lost already. But the reason this is so important is the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, they have a legitimate monopoly on the use of force in the United States. And one of the trade-offs for giving them that is that the American people need to be assured that that is going to be used in an apolitical fashion that is based solely on factual circumstances and not personal vendettas of those in charge. And I really think we are starting to get to an inflection point where I don't know that the American people will be able to trust that in a few months or a year.
And Miles, you know, we've been talking about the president going after Rosie O'Donnell in that tweet, threatening to take away her citizenship. And we focus on it because it's two famous people fighting with each other. But the key thing here, and this is what connects you to Michael to Rosie O'Donnell, all of you are private citizens. Can you please explain to the American people why it is not only scary, but dangerous that the President of the United States feels that it is okay to target private citizens? And we have seen with Donald Trump, when he targets people or entities, it's not just him coming after them, it's his followers who then, for some reason, take that as license to do whatever.
That's absolutely right, Jonathan. And I would say that the citizenship piece here is kind of a big exclamation point at the end of a scary sentence, because what the president is showing is that he is willing to go after the most fundamental aspect of the rule of law. What is the most fundamental aspect in this country? In my view, it's the ability to be considered whether you're within that regime of those rules of law or not, whether you are a citizen or not. So the president has gone as far as to say he will strip people of their most fundamental right as an American, and that is whether they can be an American. There hasn't been anything more extreme proposed by him than the idea that he has the unilateral ability to remove the citizenship of someone who is a natural born citizen. We really, really need to focus on that. And we've seen this isn't a one-off. He's using citizenship threats as leverage against his enemies. What we've seen happen to Michael and the polygraphing and intimidation of FBI agents, what we've seen with revenge investigations ordered against people like me and others, does indeed, I think, show us, Jonathan, that we are veering towards something that I used to think was hyperbole, veering towards something that could be accurately characterized as a police state. And what I mean by that is, if you look through all of history, a police state is basically when a government treats any citizen like a potential suspect and every act like a threat. And Donald Trump is using the powers of government to be able to do that to anyone who doesn't speak the party line. That should be a five-alarm fire for democracy. And I have to say, it's only because there are people like Michael Feinberg standing up that we have a shot to push back against this.
Miles, let me follow up with you, because you have asked the inspectors general at the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to investigate Trump's executive order targeting you. Have you gotten any response from the IGs?
No response yet. And look, Jonathan, I'm not going to I won't make judgment yet on whether or not we get an answer. But I think overall, we are getting the sense that the normal guardrails, well, we've known for a while that the normal guardrails of democracy to prevent these types of things are gone. The Congress has abdicated a lot of its oversight authority. The courts are under siege. And some of these internal watchdogs are already under extraordinary pressure from the White House not to be independent. So I won't hold my breath to see what happens. But that means there are very few things left to make sure people like Michael Feinberg are not persecuted for going and speaking out and telling the truth. And it's one of the reasons, Jonathan, that nonprofits in this country have come together to try to represent this people. I'd mentioned to you all before, we launched a fund called EndPresidentialRevenge.org, E-N-D, EndPresidentialRevenge.org, not just to help families like mine, but to be able to back the legal defense of these people who are being put in the crosshairs of the President of the United States for revenge. And it's going to take an army of people to push back against that. But we are just in the beginning. Remember, we're 5 months in. These are the early innings of them trying to use these autocratic levers to try to stifle the opposition.
Michael, you know, I read in that intro that there was 20 DOJ employees who worked on January 6 cases and Trump's classified documents cases that were fired on Friday. We've seen FBI people who worked on, agents who worked on January 6 cases fired. There's purge after purge after purge after purge. Who's left? Who are the kind of people that are left at the FBI?
People who are willing to compromise their integrity in terms of senior executives. I have immense faith in the workforce of agents and analysts who are keeping their heads down and doing their jobs. They took an oath to the Constitution. We all did, that we all took incredibly seriously. It was a very solemn occasion when we raised our right hands and swore it out. So I don't have a lot of worries about the workforce. What I do have worries about are the senior executives who are choosing to continue to promote under this regime and agreeing to basically bend at the knee to whatever Bongino or Patel ask.
Well, you specifically said the next few months are perilous. Why are the next few months so critical in terms of the Constitution and upholding rule of law in America?
Because what we are seeing is a massive change in the way federal law enforcement works. And it's occurring in the immigration context, but it could very well bleed over into other areas. The notion of masked federal agents refusing to identify themselves and banging down doors, patrols through totally safe neighborhoods looking for children and grandmothers. This isn't who we're supposed to be. And to be clear, the president has the right to choose whatever priorities he wants. But that doesn't mean that you disregard the procedural guardrails that have always made sure investigations don't go over a certain line that we very much want to enforce in a democracy.
Michael, I think it was the president, or was it Caroline Leavitt, put out a thing saying that, it was Tom Homan, who was talking about protesters throwing bricks and rocks at ICE agents, and then saying that those folks will be dealt with by any means necessary.
That was Trump. That was the
that was Trump saying, take care of them by any means necessary, and then arrest them, do all sorts of things. Yeah, we have it there. He calls them slime balls. Can you talk more about how that fits into what you were just talking about in terms of what you're seeing is happening in the immigration context and how it could metastasize?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that quote's pretty interesting because it's diametrically opposed to specific things we were taught when I went through the FBI Academy. We protect all people, not just the people who agree with us politically, not just the people who support the laws we are executing. We actually went through scenarios at one point where we were faced with protesters videotaping us and yelling things, and we were taught that in order to deal with that, you ignore it. You do your job. You don't focus on the people who disagree with you. As a sworn law enforcement officer, you are there to search a premises or you are there to arrest an individual. You do that, you tune out the noise, you get out. You don't turn it into a political stand.
Miles, you are an expert in the kind of retribution of this. You have this kind of fund that you guys are working on. Talk to the American people about how this changes your everyday life, right? I think, folks come out and they're like, why would they do that? Because you put so much on the line. How has this changed your everyday life?
Well, I hope it's not the same for Michael, but I know better because it follows really similar patterns. Like Michael, when he was just describing that month that he went through, where he was trying to think whether to come forward, my wife and I did the same thing. And we've done this rodeo several times before with Donald Trump. After the April 9th executive order, we actually spent about 2 months laying low and trying to figure out, do we want to wait and see if this thing blows over? Or do we want to fight back? But knowing that fighting back means there's a vastly higher likelihood that they will try to ramp up the persecution. And I'm sure Michael was in a similar position. And that's not easy. I mean, it's easy academically to look at that and say, no, of course you have to fight back. But when you've got a wife, when you got kids, it's a very different calculus. And the consequences have been extraordinary for us. We have faced very real and credible threats to our family. I have been forced out of the company that I built and my job. We have been faced with extraordinary financial threats, the prospect of losing our homes to pay for legal defense, everything you can imagine, and then some, because not to put too much on you, Michael, but as I'm sure, he and others will attest, as soon as you're on that blacklist, then you start to lose people you didn't expect. You have friends and family that you think might be in the trenches with you in that circumstance, but they too have businesses and lives and are very afraid to be in the crosshairs of the president. And all of a sudden, you are very, very isolated. And that's why it works. That's why intimidation works. And that's why the only way to counter it is you have to get people who are willing to speak the truth to stick together and to come out here in public, to have this conversation, to talk about it, to say, no, we will not let duct tape be placed over our mouths and told to keep our mouths shut.